A German major captured after the Battle of the Bulge kept repeating one thing to his American interrogators, almost like he could not let it go. The Americans, he said, fired their artillery at nothing, at empty fields, at hills where no one stood. And to him, that proved their commanders had no idea what they were doing. He was wrong in the most dangerous way a soldier can be wrong. The Americans were not missing. They were not wasting. They had stopped aiming on purpose. And it was the single most lethal thing any army did on the Western Front of World War II. This video covers why American artillery in World War II looked like total insanity to the Germans, and why it was actually the most carefully designed killing system of the entire war. It covers one hill in Normandy that took 13,000 shells in a single day, a secret American fire control method the Germans could not copy, and a weapon that arrived in December 1944 that made hiding in a foxhole a death sentence. Stay until the end, because the final number, what a single American factory produced in 1 month of 1942, explains why Germany lost World War II before most of its soldiers ever fired a shot. July 1944, Hill 192, just east of Saint-Lô in Normandy. Holding that hill were German paratroopers of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division. These were not green troops. Many had fought in Russia. They knew what artillery sounded like. They knew the rules. Then the rules stopped working. There is a detail in the American official histories so strange that it reads like a misprint. The 2nd Infantry Division, one single American division, fired up to 20 time-on-target missions in a single night onto Hill 192. Not 20 shells, 20 coordinated concentrations, each involving multiple battalions of guns, often landing where no German was standing. Often on hedgerows the Americans had already shelled the night before, often on empty roads. The artillery commander of the neighboring 29th Infantry Division recorded that on one day in mid-July, his guns fired 459 missions and over 13,000 rounds in 24 hours. One hill, one day, 13,000 shells. When American Reconnaissance photographed the hill afterward, an officer said it looked like a moth-eaten blanket. To a German artillery officer, this was not war. It was insanity. Every shell a German gun fired had been calculated, rationed, and accounted for. And here were the Americans burning through shells like water, firing at bushes and mud and nothing at all. The German conclusion was the one their training demanded. The Americans were incompetent. They had never been taught to count. They were wrong. The Americans had not stopped aiming because they could not see. They had stopped aiming because they had decided that a shell which killed nobody could still do something useful. To understand why this broke the German mind, you have to understand the number every German artillery officer carried in his head. 50. That was roughly how many rounds a heavy German artillery unit on the Russian front could expect to have on hand per gun for sustained combat by late 1941. 50 rounds. If the enemy came in waves, 50 rounds meant minutes before the barrels went cold. By 1944, in many sectors, the number had gotten worse. The central fact of German artillery in World War II was scarcity. A German crew never had enough shells. A German regiment never had enough horses to pull the guns it did have. And that last detail is not a minor one. In 1944, most German artillery in Normandy was horse-drawn. The army that built the V-2 rocket and the first jet fighter was moving its cannons with the same horsepower that pulled Napoleon's guns to Moscow. It got stranger. German General Hans Eberbach, who commanded the 5th Panzer Army, left a record of his artillery. His guns included French pieces captured in 1940, Czech pieces captured in 1939, and Russian pieces captured on the Eastern Front. Some dated to the First World War. Matching the right shells to each gun was, in his words, a logistical nightmare. So German doctrine was built by men who treated every shell as the last shell. Their field manual was explicit. Every shot must serve a purpose. The result was real precision. A German crew could put its first ranging shots inside a 50-meter circle at 10 kilometers. But precision cost them speed. A target that appeared suddenly required 10 to 15 minutes of calculation before the guns could fire effectively. In combat, 10 minutes is the difference between catching a column in the open and watching it vanish. The American system had a name most people have never heard: Harassing and Interdiction Fire. The idea is so simple it took an industrial nation to believe in it. You do not need to kill the enemy with every round. You need to break him. Pick a road junction, 12 kilometers behind the German line. You cannot see it. But you know the Germans must move supplies through it at night: food, ammunition, fuel, replacements. So you drop one shell on it at 2:23 in the morning, another at 3:07, another at 4:18. Not a barrage, just one shell at random intervals for hours. What happens to the German supply column that needed that junction? It does not move. Or it moves and loses a truck and stops. Or it takes a longer route that costs twice the time. Or the driver, awake for 36 hours, falls asleep at the wheel. Or the food cart never reaches the forward foxholes, and by the next afternoon, there are men who have not eaten in 2 days, shaking from cold and hunger. Not one of those Germans was hit. Every one of them was degraded, as surely as if the shell had landed in his hole. The American doctrine asked a completely different question than the German one. The German asked, "Is it worth firing this shell?" The American asked, "Can we afford not to fire it?" And in 1944, the American answer was no. We cannot afford to give the Germans a quiet minute. War correspondent Ernie Pyle captured it in 1943. American officers told him they had more guns than they knew what to do with. Every gun in a sector could be aimed at one spot. Veteran German soldiers, Pyle wrote, said they had never been through anything like it. Here is what makes this story work: the actual machine that made it possible. At Fort Sill, the U.S. Army had built a fire control system no other army had. They pre-computed firing data for thousands of combinations of wind, temperature, barrel wear, and elevation, and printed each one onto its own calibrated tape. When a fire mission came in, an officer pulled the correct tape, laid it between 2 points on the map, and read the firing solution straight off it. An American battery could put steel on a map reference in about 3 minutes. A German battery needed 10 to 15. That speed unlocked the deadliest American innovation of all: time on target. The Fire Direction Center broadcast a countdown to every battery in range. Each battery calculated its own time of flight, then fired at the precise second that made every shell from every gun arrive at the target at the same instant. The first warning a German soldier got was the entire concentration landing on him at once. No incoming whistle, no time to find cover. Everything all at once. According to the Army Historical Foundation and Time on Target records, the U.S. 7th Corps refined this into corps-level fire. During the Operation Cobra breakout near Saint-Lô, American artillery massed 258 guns and expended 140,000 rounds in coordinated strikes that neutralized German strongpoints with almost no warning. The German general Fritz Bayerlein watched it happen to the Panzer Lehr Division, the most lavishly equipped armored division Germany ever fielded. He described the bombers coming as if on a conveyor belt, and the ground turning into a moonscape with craters touching rim to rim. He reported losing roughly 70% of his troops as dead, wounded, crazed, or, his word, numbed. Several of his men, he wrote, went mad and ran into the open until they were cut down. Then, in December 1944, the Americans added one more thing that removed the last defense the Germans had. A normal shell explodes on impact. If it hits soft ground, it buries itself first, and much of its force goes up and out. A man flat in his foxhole had a real chance. The proximity fuse ended that. It was a tiny radio transmitter built into the nose of the shell that detonated it automatically at the perfect height above the ground, turning every round into an airburst that rained shrapnel straight down. A foxhole was no longer cover. Lying flat was no longer cover. The only cover was a roof over your head. The Army had held the Fuze back for years, terrified the Germans would capture one and copy it for anti-aircraft use. On December 16, 1944, the day the Battle of the Bulge began, the restriction was lifted. According to the proximity fuse records, around 200,000 VT fused shells, codenamed Posit, were fired during the battle. The Germans had felt safe because the bad winter weather should have blinded American observers. It did not matter. The shells found them anyway. General Patton wrote to the War Department describing one engagement. His Third Army caught a German battalion trying to cross the Sauer River and hit it with a single battalion concentration of the new shells. His count, which he flagged as by actual count, was 702 German dead, from one concentration. Patton wrote that when every army got this shell, they would have to invent new methods of warfare. By now, the German soldier had no answer left. He could not move by day because American spotter planes and tiny Piper Cubs circled overhead and called fire within minutes. He could not move by night because the harassing fire caught him. He could not fire back because by the time his crew calculated a solution, the American Fire Direction Center had already shifted to a new target. And he could no longer even hide in the ground. This is the verdict the evidence produces. The Germans were not wrong that the Americans fired thousands of rounds at empty positions. They were wrong about what that fire was doing. They graded the Americans on their own metric, shells per kill. And by that metric, the Americans were the worst gunners of the war. But that was never the American metric. The American metric was what each shell prevented, what it denied, what it ruined for the men on the receiving end, who now could not move, sleep, eat, or resupply. And prevention scales in a way that aiming never can. You can fire prevention at 10 places at once, at empty places, at places where the enemy is not yet. The German doctrine asked, is it worth firing? The American doctrine asked, can we afford not to? Only one of those questions can be answered by a nation whose factories produced 567,000 rounds of 155mm ammunition in a single month of 1942. More in that 1 month than the entire United States produced in 2 full years at modern peacetime rates. The Germans could afford precision. The Americans could afford prevention. In a war that ran from 1941 to 1945, prevention compounded into a panzer regiment that arrived missing half its vehicles, into a division that never counterattacked because its fuel dump was shelled at 3 a.m, into Bayerlein writing that his men had gone mad in the open. A German gun crew counting its 50 rounds could never have done this, not because it lacked the courage, but because it lacked the factories. Their doctrine had to be built around scarcity, and so their officers looked at American abundance and called it incompetence, because their minds had no other box to put it in. The Americans had not abandoned the profession of artillery. They had understood, better than anyone in the war, what industrial war actually was. And then they built the army that could fight it.